Excavating the Old Kingdom. The Egyptian archaeologists. In Egypt today, it is generally believed that most of the archaeological discoveries that have been made in the country were achieved by foreign expeditions. Very little has been written about the efforts and successes of native archaeologists, yet numerous Egyptians have excavated at sites throughout the land and have contributed substantially to the field of Egyptology by means of their discoveries and research. 3 generations of Egyptian scholars have worked in the Memphite region, mostly at sites within the cemeteries at Giza, Saqqara, and Dashur, and this essay takes a number of their explorations as examples to shed light on native contributions to the study of the Old Kingdom. Brief description of the Memphite region. The cemeteries of Memphis extend from Abu Rawash in the north to Meidum in the south and house tombs of kings, queens, and officials from the time of the Archaic period to the end of the Old Kingdom. 2 Abu Rawash, which includes a large cemetery dating back to the First Dynasty, is dominated by the unfinished pyramid complex of King Jafar of the Fourth Dynasty. 3 Farther south is the necropolis of Giza, site of the pyramid complexes of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure of the Fourth Dynasty and of many non-royal tombs from the Old Kingdom. Presiding over Giza is the Great Sphinx, the first colossal statue known from pharaonic Egypt. As an archetype of antiquity, the image of the Sphinx has stirred the imagination of poets, writers, adventurers, and tourists for centuries. Originally a symbol of Egyptian kingship, in modern times it has come to stand for the Egyptian nation itself. 4. The Layer Pyramid, built by Kabah in the Third Dynasty and characterized by a superstructure typical of the period, stands at Zawiat el-Arian, 7 kilometers to the north of Saqqara. And about 1 kilometer to the northwest of the Layer Pyramid the so-called unfinished pyramid is found. This monument's ownership remains in dispute, with some Egyptologists maintaining that it belonged to Jafar of the Fourth Dynasty and others attributing it to Nebka of the same dynasty. South of Zawiat el-Arian is Abusir, encompassing the pyramids of most of the kings and queens of the Fifth Dynasty, among which the pyramid complex of Sahara is the best preserved. The remains of 2 sun temples stand near Abusir, one of them at Abu Ghurab. As inscriptions reveal that 6 or more kings of the Fifth Dynasty had sun temples, we know that at least 4 such monuments have yet to be discovered. 5. Saqqara, south of Abusir, one of the principal cemeteries of the Archaic period, was chosen by Djoser, of the Third Dynasty, as his eternal home. It was in what later became the central section of this necropolis that the architect Imhotep constructed Djoser's imposing step pyramid complex. A large step pyramid was begun nearby for Sekhemkhet, Djoser's successor. This structure, which was never finished, lies southwest of Djoser's complex and is known as the Buried Pyramid. Userkaf and Unis, the first and last kings of the Fifth Dynasty, built their own pyramid complexes near Djoser's step pyramid, and in the Sixth Dynasty others were erected in the northern and southern parts of the necropolis, the most important being those of Teti, Pepi I, and Pepi Il. Most of these 5th and 6th Dynasty pyramids are associated with cemeteries for officials and nobles of the same period, some of whose tombs have beautifully carved or painted chapels. South of Saqqara are 2 other Old Kingdom cemeteries, the fields of Dashur and Meidum. Sefru, the first king of the Fourth Dynasty, built 3 pyramids at these sites, the first at Meidum, the second and third at Dashur. 6 important officials and relatives of the pharaohs of the early Fourth Dynasty were buried in cemeteries not far from these pyramids. 3 generations of Egyptian archaeologists. The following list records some of the most important scholars among the 3 generations of Egyptian archaeologists who have conducted excavations in Memphite cemeteries between Abu Rawash and Meidum from the later 92 AS to the present day. The names are arranged according to the chronology of their activity. The collective achievements of these men form a rich corpus of material that would be an appropriate subject for a future book. Here, however, space permits reference to only the few Egyptologists whose names are italicized, together with a brief discussion of some of the important discoveries they had the good fortune to make over the past 80 years. Later studied Egyptology in Paris. He was the first Egyptian appointed professor of Egyptology in the Faculty of Arts at Cairo University. Well into his career as an archaeologist he read for his doctorate in Vienna, completing his studies there in 1939.7. In 1928 Hassan commenced his archaeological activities, working with the German Egyptologist Hermann Juncker, who was excavating west of the Great Pyramid at Giza. Within a year Hassan was leading his own team from Cairo University, which undertook important and extensive explorations at both Giza and Saqqara that lasted until 1939. It is estimated that Hassan discovered more than 200 tombs and thousands of related artifacts. Among his most important finds at Giza were the tomb of Queen Khentkhazai and its associated temples and pyramid city. He also uncovered the tombs of Khafra's sons and courtiers, as well as the solar boat pits of Khafra himself. 8 In addition, Hassan pursued excavations around the Great Sphinx, where he unearthed the temple of Amenhotep II. At Saqqara, Hassan excavated the 5th Dynasty Valley Temple and Causeway of King Unis. 10 In the vicinity he uncovered many Old Kingdom tombs, as well as //1 middle dot /II. Two large tombs that are of particular interest because they date much earlier, to the Second Dynasty. Toward the end of his career as an active archaeologist, at age 68, Hassan participated in the campaign to salve Vago monuments in Nubia, a project whose success he. Figure 94. Colonel Abdel Nasser visiting the pyramid of Sekhemkhet at Saqqara, June 30, 1954. Live to see. Contention. It yielded much valuable material, including. Without doubt, Hassan ranks as one of the most important of all Egyptian archaeologists by virtue of his numerous discoveries at Giza and Saqqara as well as his many scholarly publications. The rare and beautiful Stele of Rohr, Cat. Number 144, which he found at Giza, appropriately represents this great Egyptologist's contribution to Old Kingdom studies. The Karyagonam, 1911-1959, figure 93, was awarded a diploma in Egyptology at Cairo University in 1934. At the age of 26 he became Hassan's assistant during the excavations of 1937 in and around the pyramid complex of Unis at Saqqara. In 1939 Ghonim was appointed Inspector of Antiquities at Aswan. He spent more than a decade working in southern Egypt and became Chief Inspector of Upper Egypt in 1946. He held this post until 1951, when he was made Chief Inspector at Saqqara, where he discovered the unfinished pyramid of Sekhemkhet, figure 94. Undoubtedly Ghonem's greatest discovery, the King's Pyramid, was an important landmark in the study of Old Kingdom royal tombs and their contents. It yielded much valuable material, including. Without doubt, Hassan ranks as one of the most important of all Egyptian archaeologists by virtue of his numerous discoveries at Giza and Saqqara as well as his many scholarly publications. The rare and beautiful Stele of Rohr, Cat. Number 144, which he found at Giza, appropriately represents this great Egyptologist's contribution to Old Kingdom studies. The Karyagonam, 1911-1959, figure 93, was awarded a diploma in Egyptology at Cairo University in 1934. At the age of 26 he became Hassan's assistant during the excavations of 1937 in and around the pyramid complex of Unis at Saqqara. In 1939 Ghonim was appointed Inspector of Antiquities at Aswan. He spent more than a decade working in southern Egypt and became Chief Inspector of Upper Egypt in 1946. He held this post until 1951, when he was made Chief Inspector at Saqqara, where he discovered the unfinished pyramid of Sekhemkhet, figure 94. Undoubtedly Ghonem's greatest discovery, the King's Pyramid, was an important landmark in the study of Old Kingdom royal tombs in there. A seemingly intact sarcophagus made of alabaster discovered within the king's burial chamber. Once opened, however, it was found to be empty, and in fact not a trace of Sekhemkhet's mummy was ever located. 3 bracelets belonging to Sekhemkhet, Cat. Number 19. Exemplify Ghonem's finds in the present exhibition. Ghonem's life ended tragically when, in a state of acute depression after he had been held responsible for the disappearance of an artifact, he drowned himself in the Nile. Barely a week later the object in question, which had been accidentally misplaced, was located. Kamal al-Malik, 1918-1987, figure 95, unearthed the boat of Khufu south of the Great Pyramid. His remarkable find, made in our 95-4 when boat pits were revealed below the surface of debris that was being removed from the area, ranks as one of the greatest discoveries in Egyptian archaeology. Its implications involve not only the burials of kings and the cult of Khufu 13 but practical issues as well. The bark excavated by El-Malak and another that still remains in a second pit provide direct information relating to the construction of large-scale wood boats in antiquity, a subject formerly understood primarily from depictions in tombs. 14. Other Egyptian archaeologists, including Muhammad Zaki Zaki Iskander, and Salah Osman, played roles in the discovery of Khufu's bark, and we cannot speak of El-Malik's accomplishments in this realm without mentioning our great restorer and conservator, Haj Ahmed Yusuf. Haj Ahmed Yusuf, 1912 to 1999, figure 96, started his career as a restorer with American Egyptologist George Reisner during the excavation of the tomb of Queen Hetep Hirzai, CCAT. Numbers 31 to 33, and subsequently pursued his extraordinary craft at the Egyptian Museum, Cairo. As the individual chiefly responsible for the restoration of Khufu's boat, Haj Ahmed spent almost 28 years working on its 650 parts and fitting together some 1,224 pieces of cedar wood. During the course of these labors he lived in a rest house near the tomb of Divan and produced many beautiful photographs of the boat as it underwent reconstruction. His work saw its culmination in the display of the reassembled bark at the Cheops, Khufu, Boat Museum, which opened in Giza on March 6, 1982. The present essay can offer only a glimpse of Haj Ahmed's achievements. Indeed, an entire volume should be devoted to the life and accomplishments of this extraordinary man. Ahmed Fakhri, 1905 to 1973, graduated from the Faculty of Arts at Cairo University in 1928 and continued his education in Belgium, England, and Germany for the next 4 years. On his return to Egypt in 1932 he joined the Department of Antiquities, initially as an inspector at Giza, then at Luxor, and, finally, starting in 193 as Chief Inspector of Middle Egypt, the Oases, in the Delta. He also worked for a period in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo. In 1952 Fakhri was appointed Professor of Ancient History in the Faculty of Arts at Cairo University. During his tenure he served as a visiting professor at many foreign institutions and became well known abroad. Fakhri excavated extensively, conducting his most significant work at the Oases, Giza, and Dashur. 16 in 1905 Igama. Mukhtar, then head of the Egyptian Antiquities Organization, appointed him director of the Pyramid Studies Project, with Giza as its center. Dashur, however, became the site of Fakhri's greatest discoveries. There, in October 952, he found the so-called Valley Temple, or statue cult temple, of the Bent Pyramid, in which he uncovered some 1,400 inscribed blocks, statues, and stelae. 17 Fakhri's Dashur finds are his most important legacy, both for irrevocably establishing Sufru as the owner of the Bent Pyramid and for providing Egyptologists with information about the content of particular scenes as well as their positions within early Old Kingdom pyramid complexes. The Valley Temple reliefs from the Bent Pyramid complex, 2 of which, Cat. Number 22, are included in the present exhibition, are arguably the most illuminating of Fakhri's discoveries. Abu Munaim Abu Bekr, 1907 to 1976, figure 97, studied at Cairo University under Alexander Galina Chef and Reed for his doctorate in 1938 at Berlin University under the guidance of Kurt Seta. In 1939 he began his teaching career at Alexandria University, moving to Cairo University in 1954. He taught the present author Egyptian archaeology as a visiting professor at Alexandria University in 1968. Between 1939 and 1953 numerous sites in the Giza necropolis, especially in the area to the west of the Great Pyramid, were excavated by Abu Bekr, who also participated in the Nubian salvage campaign between 1960 and 1965. Only a portion of Abu Bekr's work saw publication during his lifetime. 18 and additional detailed studies of his expeditions would contribute much to our knowledge of Old Kingdom tombs at Giza. Abul Aziz Saleh, born 1921, figure 98, received his diploma in Egyptology from Cairo University in 1951. His fieldwork career commenced shortly thereafter, with excavations at Tuna El Gabel in 1954-55. Subsequently he taught at Riyadh University and King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and then, in 1977, he became Dean of the Faculty of Archaeology at Cairo University. He is currently a member of many important archaeological committees. The topic of his dissertation, Upbringing and Education in Ancient Egypt, is of particular interest today, and his contributions to the field of Egyptian history, which he taught the present author, are original and important. Perhaps Saleh's most intriguing discoveries were made at Giza, just south of the causeway of Menkauri's pyramid. Here he found unique structures of stone rubble mixed with mortar that he calls foundation embankments and believes to be ramps that were used to transport blocks to building sites. 19 He also uncovered what he has suggested is an open-air altar. So they found as well 15 buildings made from rubble and mortar that in his view served as living and working quarters for an industrial community preoccupied with activities connected with the cult of Menkore. Later study of the site by the present writer has confirmed this theory. Material evidence shows that the area was used for the manufacture of objects and foodstuffs essential to maintain the cult. Ovens and fireplaces indicate the existence of a bakery and public kitchens, while other structures have been identified as workshops and official buildings, including a hall for scribes. These finds provide Egyptologists with new insight into the practical efforts that sustained a royal cult in antiquity. Although communal buildings of the kind Saleh uncovered are rare, it can be assumed that they must have existed in association with other pyramid complexes in the Memphite region and that more may yet be found. Third Dynasty. 1. Wall decoration from the funerary apartments of King Djoser. Within Djoser's funerary complex at Saqqara, apartments were carved out beneath both the king's pyramid and a building called the Southern Tomb. The rooms around the king's burial chamber reserved for his use and located 28 meters, 92 feet, below ground and in the Southern Tomb include a series of chambers whose walls are faced with sculpted limestone blocks, into which thousands of small faience tiles were fitted. The vivid color of this covering gave these apartments their name, the Blue Chambers of Djoser, which can no longer be visited. In the blue chambers under the pyra. One wall has 4 panels surmounted by diet pillars, the hieroglyph meaning stability, supporting an arch. Another, probably representing the palace facade, is decorated with 3 niches and small windows sculpted in limestone, which stand out from the blue wall tiled with faience. The backs of the niches are magnificently decorated in relief. Here, King Djoser is seen performing rites, most importantly, running the Heb race. The royal apartments of the Southern Tomb display the same decoration. The tiles have different shapes and dimensions. Those surrounding the windows are much smaller than the others and form a tight grid. At the top, the Ed pillars, with their elongated shapes, curves, and representations of veins, evoke stylized plant elements, such as reed grass. Probably the decoration on these walls depicts reed matting and captures the appearance of the lightweight constructions of the era. Yet it should perhaps be seen as more than an evocation of architecture. The symbolic value of the blue-green color, signifying regeneration, in the mention in the pyramid text, Cat. Number 177, of a field of reeds located in the next world suggests that this decoration also alludes to the destiny of the deceased king. Like most of the tiles discovered in the blue chambers, the examples in this exhibition are rectangular and are sometimes marked on the back with a hieroglyphic sign. The slightly convex face is covered with blue glaze. The flat back, which is white and unglazed, has a rectangular tenon with a hole through it to accept a string for attachment. These are among the oldest examples of molded Egyptian faience. The limestone facing was prepared and sculpted to house the tiles. In this example, bands of molding represent the ties holding bundles of upright reeds. Channels serve to house the tiles. A tenon on the back of each tile fits into a mortise in the side of the limestone channels. At regular intervals, small conduits were drilled into the stone moldings. A brace was passed through them, holding a sequence of 4 to 8 tiles in place until the plaster mortar dried. The step pyramid of Djoser contained no fewer than 36,000 of these tiles, and many examples of this type have been found in other monuments dating to the early dynasties, including royal tombs, the temple at Elephantine, and even non-royal mastabas. 2. Model of the Third Dynasty complex of King Djoser at Saqqara. The present model, which shows the complex of the Third Dynasty King Djoser in the necropolis of Memphis, is based on the results of excavations conducted by Jean-Philippe Lauer, beginning in 192.7. The enclosure wall of the actual complex, measuring 2.77 by 544 meters, replicates in stone the paneled brick wall of the royal palace. It has 15 gates, but only one, at the south end of the east side, functions as a real entrance. The central focus of the complex is a 6-step mastaba usually called the step pyramid, although it is not a true pyramid, which rises over underground apartments. These apartments reproduce elements of a royal palace. A second royal underground palace, the Southern Tomb, lies below the center of the enclosure's south wall. Both underground apartments contain chambers covered with blue-green faience tiles. A palace or temple-like structure of unknown cultic purpose adjoins the north side of the step mastaba. The complex's eastern area is filled with rows of smaller sanctuaries belonging to deities who apparently visit the king. 25 to 30 chapels for these deities are arranged around an elongated court. Two larger and apparently more significant sanctuaries lie north of the court. A large open area south of the steppe mastaba probably served as a festival court. The western and northern parts of the complex are filled with buildings that seem to be giant storehouses for the royal possessions. The complex is the earliest large-scale stone monument of ancient Egypt. It is a copy of the king's earthly residence, cult, and administration center intended for his eternal use. In early Egyptian buildings that were constructed of brick, wood, and reed were simplified and translated into stone. Most structures are massive mock buildings that have no interior rooms, and their function is for the most part open to speculation. Apparently no rituals were performed in the complex. It seems that the replica had the power to produce the intended reality. The interior's clustered organization is partially the result of several building phases. However, it is clear that the designers were not attempting to achieve the rigid orientation, frontality, and symmetry typical of later Egyptian architecture. 3. Doorjamb of King Djoser. During excavations in 1992-93 at Saqqara, two interesting reused blocks were uncovered in the pavement of the funerary temple of the 6th dynasty Queen Iput I. When subsequently fitted together, the pieces were found to form a doorjamb that dated to the reign of the 3rd dynasty King Djoser, builder of the step pyramid. The jamb has a flat top, decorated front and sides, and a blank back. Its front was divided into 20 compartments. The uppermost compartment is large and has a curved top. It contains a rectangular syrinx surmounted by a falcon wearing the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, which represents the god Horus. The syrinx encloses hieroglyphs spelling Netjeriket, the Horus name of Djoser. Below the syrinx are 12 compartments, alternately large and small. Each of the large registers contains a recumbent jackal, while in each small one there appears a recumbent lion or lioness. Below these compartments is another syrinx, beneath which is another sequence of jackals, lions, and lionesses. Only 6 registers of the lower sequence are preserved. Given the Egyptian love of symmetry, it is likely that the second block also contained 12 registers. The monument may even have contained a third identical block. The recumbent jackal and lion/lioness figures have been carefully arranged within different size compartments tailored to fit the animal depicted. The lion/lioness, positioned slightly off-center in each compartment, displays a lashing tail that suggests an alertness belied by its recumbent pose. The jackal is more centered in its compartment, but its carefully rendered tail extends to the bottom line, while its ears touch the top. Unlike the lion/lioness, the jackal is thus connected with its frame. Each of the side panels is divided into 2 long, vertical compartments, the upper round-topped, the second rectangular. The undulating body of a snake with a protruding forked tongue, portrayed as if slowly sliding across the sand, fills each compartment. The artists emphasize the importance of these serpents by carving them in higher relief than the decoration on the front and by cross-hatching their bodies to give the appearance of skin. This block may have come either from Djoser's Heb said court or from a lost ceremonial gate, which perhaps gave access to a valley temple some distance from the Djoser complex as it exists today. 4. Boundary Stela of King Djoser. The large court south of Djoser's step pyramid has yielded a number of stelae bearing the name of the king and of 2 daughters of the king, Anat-Kes and Het-Nebdi. These women are also depicted on reliefs from Heliopolis, Cat. Number 76, and on small curved top stelae found near the Serdab north of the pyramid. Present opinion holds that these stelae were erected at the start of construction on the pyramid, perhaps to mark off the sacred area or to delimit the vast space between the pyramid and the southern tomb. There are nearly 40 of these stelae, which were reused in the paneled revetment walls that line the south court. They look like truncated cones and are about 2 meters, 80 inches, high with the base measuring meter, 40 inches, in diameter. Composed of several stacked half-drums of limestone, each bore a sculpted inscription arranged in a frame measuring about 20 centimeters, 8 inches, per side. These inscriptions, carefully executed in the type of raised relief carved on the stelae in the blue chambers at Saqqara, Cat. No. Are all identical. This fragment is one of the best preserved. Near the center, Netjeriket, Pharaoh Djoser's Horus name, is inscribed in 3 hieroglyphs on the walls of a palace surmounted by a divine falcon. On the right, the Emut fetish holds out its beneficent signs to the figure, symbolizing life and strength. Above the fetish is the dog of Anubis, the god associated with the Emute fetish, and his epithet, he who presides over the sacred land. The names of the two princesses are inscribed at the left. 5. Vase with rope decoration. This vase, quite extraordinary in its demon science, was discovered in an underground gallery of the Great Pyramid of Khufu at Saqqara. While excavating the complex, the archaeologists James E. Quibell and Jean-Philippe Lauer were surprised to discover about 40,000 vases of various shapes and materials. Since the ceilings of the corridors had collapsed, most of the vessels were broken. The fact that they were often arranged one inside another strongly suggests that they were placed there for safekeeping by Khufu, either after earlier tombs had been plundered or because such tombs were in poor condition. In any case, many of these vases do not date to the reign of Khufu but to the 1st or 2nd dynasty, as inscriptions on certain vases attest. They are all of high quality, reflecting the skill and patience of the artisans, who had only modest tools available for hollowing out and decorating different types of stone, some of which such as greywacke, granite, and amethyst are very hard. The decoration on the present example imitates rope, or rather a sling made of rope, that encircles the vase and creates a geometric motif. It probably represents a device designed to transport the vase, translated into a purely ornamental pattern. The knots and twills of the rope are rendered very realistically. 6. Statue base with enemy heads. On two faces of this alabaster block a pair of human heads has been sculpted side by side in high relief. Their features reflect two ethnic types that were depicted throughout the Pharaonic period, the Near Eastern with full beard, aquiline nose, and high cheekbones, and the Libyan with round face and a goatee. Among the list of the pharaoh's traditional enemies only the Nubians are M1 SSMG. A rectangular cavity carved in the top of the block suggests that this object was the pedestal of a statue. The viewer must imagine it surmounted by the figure of a triumphant pharaoh, symbolically trampling his defeated enemies. This evocative theme, first introduced on pre-dynastic palettes, one was treated again on the pedestals of royal statues from the Archaic period. These latter statues depict the sovereign in the costume of the Heb, the ceremony in which he ritually renewed his strength. 2 From Khufu's complex at Saqqara came several statue bases very similar to this one in both form and decoration. 3 There, chiseled faces emerge from the block of stone in an identical arrangement, and the features are individualized without compromising the general meaning of the group. For stylistic reasons, too, this work may be assigned to the 3rd dynasty. The prominent cheekbones, thick mouths, and brutal energy of the foreign enemies of the pharaoh suggest the large statue of Khufu, figure 29, and the flatness of the faces characterizes the non-royal statuary of his era, see cat. Nose. RR 13. Decorated fragments from the chapel of King Khufu at Heliopolis. Executed with exquisite refinement and precision, these reliefs once decorated a chapel built by Pharaoh Khufu at Heliopolis, not far from modern Cairo. 36 fragments of belonging to the same monument were discovered by the Italian archaeologist Ernesto Schiaparelli in the foundations of a later building, where they had been reused. It is not known what Khufu's temple looked like initially or why it was destroyed. The images and texts carved on the fragments are primarily indications to the assembly of the 9 creator gods of Heliopolis, the Ened. They suggest that the chapel was dedicated to the Jubilee Feast, or Heb, during which the pharaoh ritually renewed his strength. Cat. No. I-21. Images of the primordial gods are separated by columns of text immortalizing the words of protect time they direct to the sovereign. One fragment, A, which bears wishes for life, stability, dominion, and happiness in a vertical column at left, shows, in the center, a palace facade with double doors. According to very old conventions, above the palace appears the pharaoh's Horus name, Nedjeri-Ket, of which only the last 2 signs survive. On each leaf of the door, 2 other elements of the royal titulary are finely sculpted, King of Upper and Lower Egypt and he of the 2 ladies. A second fragment, B, on which only the lower part of the scene has been preserved, depicts Khufu seated on a throne, one hand on his knees, the other holding the ceremonial flail, whose dangling ends are visible at the top of the block. 3 small female figures are kneeling at the pharaoh's feet. Texts give the identity of the first 2, daughter of the king, in a case, followed by the queen, she who sees Horus and Seth, Hetep-Nebdi. The identity of the third is unknown. She encircles the pharaoh's leg with her arm, in a pose that was later imitated in royal and non-royal statuary, see cat. Numbers 126, 130. 1. The third fragment, c, depicts a seated god wearing a long wig and a divine beard, with curled tip. The powerful face, thick lips, and coarse profile of the deity are reminiscent of Djoser as he is depicted at Saqqara. A broad collar embellishes the plain, clinging garment from which one hand emerges to rest on the knees. The hieroglyph for B, which appears above the figure and is probably the last sign of his name, suggests this is the god named Geb. The column of hieroglyphs records the deity's wishes for Pharaoh Djoser: I give life, stability, dominion, and happiness eternally. These fragments, which have extraordinary historical and religious importance, may be compared with the admirable stele in the funerary complex of Djoser at Saqqara, Cat. Number 4. There is the same subtlety in the way the relief stands out against the background, the same precision in the details, and the same mastery in the carving and arrangement of the large hieroglyphs. 8. Stela of King Zanyakt. The image of a pharaoh beating the head of an enemy with his club as he grabs him by the hair is among the common themes that express the omnipotence of the sovereign of Egypt, great warrior and subduer. It appeared during the Archaic period, on the tablets of King Den, for example, figure 102. The theme was repeated extensively on the pylons of temples, boundary stele, and the most precious jewelry. This is one of the earliest examples, rendered in relief. King Zanyakt, Djoser's shadowy predecessor, or perhaps successor, is slaying a warrior, no longer visible, who personified the tribes of the eastern desert. The sovereign, whose name is inscribed at right on the wall of a palace surmounted by the falcon god Horus, is wearing the red crown, symbol of his power over Lower Egypt. In front of him on a shield was the emblem of the god Wepwai, now lost. The few hieroglyphs surviving in the right corner of the fragment signify turquoise, a highly prized stone, which the Egyptians went to the mountains of the Sinai Peninsula to extract. This relief, a large stela carved in the red sandstone of Wadi Magara, comes from that region. Executed in the cliff itself under difficult conditions, and exposed to the elements for more than 4 millennia, it does not display the same sculptural qualities as reliefs almost as old from Saqqara or Heliopolis, Cat. Numbers 4, 7. It belongs to a series of inscriptions with the names of Kings Djoser, Sekhem-Ket, and Zanyakt that commemorate the first expeditions launched by the pharaohs to the so-called turquoise terraces. Distinguished from non-royal inscriptions by their bellicose iconography, they magically mark the limits of the pharaoh's domain and immortalize his appropriation of the world. A text from the time of Shkar-e-Sasi, a 5th dynasty pharaoh, reveals that royal troops also came to Wadi Magara to seek another very precious resource, copper. 9. Stela of King Khajet. Aside from an inscription, the only decorative on the stela carved in low relief is the image of a sovereign in the embrace of a god with a falcon's head. The scene is framed by a relief border that is widest at the left and across the bottom of the slab. The pharaoh is depicted standing, wearing the white crown, a false beard, a corselet, and a kilt adorned with an animal's tail. A dagger is passed through his belt. In his right hand he holds a mace with a pear-shaped head, and in his left a long staff with a pointed tip and a flange in the middle, a type of staff well documented for the Old Kingdom. The falcon-headed god Horus faces him, clasping the king's forearm with his left hand, while the right arm encircles the sovereign's shoulders as a sign of protection. This is one of the oldest known representations depicting Horus as a man with a falcon's head. The two figures are identified by the hieroglyphs above them. At left, the falcon perched atop the palace facade gives the king's Horus name, Horus Khajet, while the facing hieroglyphs read Horus in the residence. The pharaoh is thus called by one of the many names that place him under the protection of Horus, tutelary god of royalty. Horus is depicted in the form worshipped in Heliopolis, a city near Cairo. Nothing is known about Khajet, who is sometimes identified with Huni, last king of the 3rd dynasty. In its very shallow relief, which blends into the background, the stone carving is comparable to 6 stele adorning the niches under Djoser's pyramid and southern tomb at Saqqara. 3. There is the same subtlety in the treatment of the human body, whose forms are rendered through slight gradations of the surface. The subtle modeling indicates the structure of the king's face, the more pronounced facial features of the divine falcon, the articulation of the knees, and the musculature of the legs. This simple, perfectly ordered composition is echoed in the large hieroglyphs that surmount the scene. Even though the work is smaller than the stele of Djoser, we can assume that, like them, it occupied the back of a niche and stood out against the background of blue-green faience. See Cat. No. R. 10. Male deity. This is one of the oldest surviving Egyptian statues of a standing deity. The figure is sculpted in a rare stone, an orthosite gneiss, one known as Hefren's diorite, which Egyptians went searching for on the borders of distant Nubia. See Royal Statuary by Krzysztof Grzymski in this catalog. p. 5-3. The figure has his back to a broad support with a curved top, whose shape is suggestive of the royal stele of Abydos. Standing with his left leg forward, arms at his sides, he is depicted in an attitude that later became customary for statues of men. His left fist is clenched, and his right hand holds a knife. Its wide blade, pressed against his thigh, stands out in sharp relief. The torso is modeled with care, as are the bones of the rib cage and knees. The figure is nude except for a wide belt knotted in front, from which a penis sheath is suspended. The full face, framed by a broad, round wig, is organized in horizontal bands. The eyes, their upper lids emphasized by a large pouch of fat, the short, wide nose, and the horizontal mouth, bordered at the bottom by the false beard, which falls low on the chest. The god's palpable strength is concentrated in the broad shoulders, on which the head seems to rest directly. As the provenance of this work is unknown and there are no hieroglyphic inscriptions, dating must rest on stylistic criteria. The unusual treatment of the knife, sculpted partly in high relief, may be compared with the carving of the scepter tipped up against Sepa's right arm in the two large statues of him from Saqqara. Cat. Nose. RR. 12. The voluminous wig and the proportions of the back support suggest a date prior to the 4th dynasty. The archaic form of the penis sheath and the long beard, which is different from the one ordinarily worn by pharaohs, suggests this is the statue of a deity, Old Kingdom examples of which are very rare. The god represented may be one Urus, who is depicted in Egyptian iconography with a penis sheath and round wig and who sometimes brandishes a weapon. The statue probably came from a sanctuary, possibly it was part of a group of divine figures placed in small niches tucked away in the back of chapels belonging to Djoser's funerary complex at Saqqara. 11. Sepa standing. Purchased for the Louvre in 1837 with the reliefs of A.T. from Saqqara. Cat. Number 18. Two large statues of Sepa, see also Cat. Number 12, and one of Lady Nessa. Cat. Number 13, undoubtedly originated at the same site. All three statues are sculpted in a bioclastic limestone produced by bivalves and gastropods, the quarry from which it was cut may be at Hawan. The three figures have retained abundant traces of colored paint, black for the hair and eyes, and green for the wide cosmetic bands used. In the Archaic period, they are the oldest known examples of large Egyptian non-royal statuary. The date proposed is based on the inscription on a shard found in the Step Pyramid of Djoser, which mentions a titulary identical to Sepa's, although the name has been lost. Sepa is standing, and he apparently is walking because his body weight seems to fall on the advancing left leg. With his left arm bent across his waist, he grips a staff. In his open right hand he holds a scepter with an elongated tip, which stands out in sharp relief against his arm. The statue has no back support, and, although its proportions are close to life size, it has a certain massiveness and rigidity that are accentuated by such features as the very short neck, the broad shoulders, the position of the arms held tightly against the body, and the thick legs and ankles. A short, voluminous wig hugs the contours of the round face, concealing the ears and extending to the base of the neck but leaving the forehead uncovered. The carefully detailed rows of curls are all of equal length. The top of the head has a circular depression from which the locks of hair radiate, forming a circle that organizes the rest of the hairstyle. A wide band of green cosmetic is drawn under the eyes, and the upper lid of each eye forms a ridge that was once highlighted in black. The inner corners are drawn with a certain naturalism. On the right eye the ridge extends to the outer corner and around part of the lower lid. The upper lids are indicated by a fold, the fine eyebrows curve gently. The nose has been restored. The upper lip of the sharply outlined mouth is notched in the center by a clearly defined philtrum. The placid face is expressionless. The modeling of the body is not pronounced. Such anatomical details as the tendons in the neck and the individualized clavicle shown as an almost horizontal ridge are carefully rendered, however. On the rounded pectorals the nipples are indicated by two circles in relief. The curve of the abdomen is captured, with a recessed round navel and the hip bones showing. No muscles are visible on the flat arms. The treatment of the back is even more understated. The upper body emerges from the plain kilt, A furrow represents the spinal column, and, more unusually, the shape of the shoulder blades is indicated by two symmetrical semicircles. Seen from the front, the short kilt, fastened by a plain belt with an oval knot, is pleated along the right side. The pleats on either side of the staff are treated differently. On the statue's thick legs, emphasis is given to the left knee with its quadrangular cap, flanked toward the top by two protuberances and accentuated by a ridge in the shape of a chevron, which joins the ridge of the tibia. The space between the legs has not been cut away, and only the external line of the right leg is sculpted. Like the left leg, it is treated with great simplicity. Muscles are schematized as a vertical ridge, and a bump indicates the ankle bone. The left profile view reveals the silhouette of the thigh extending up beneath the kilt. The inscriptions, which stand out in relief on the top of the pedestal, give the titles and name of Sepa, Chief of the Tens of the South, Priest of Nezer and Kurdi, Royal Acquaintance, Harry Seeker, Staff of the White Bull, Sepa. According to a practice that dates to the very beginning of the Old Kingdom, the inscriptions do not face the beholder but are arranged to be read from the side, from the front to the back of the statue. The right profile view, which shows both legs, is the most important, as it is on reliefs of the same period. 12. Sepa standing. This statue is somewhat taller than the other figure of Sepa in this exhibition, Cat. No. 2, but is identical in pose, costume, and features, as well as in style. There are a few differences in treatment, however, some attributable to the effects of wear. Although they are not as clearly delineated, the eyebrows are more pronounced than those of Nessa, Cat. Number 13. The horizontality of the mouth is tempered by the notch in the upper lip. The modeling of the wings of the nose, indicated by a slight groove, is particularly well done. The indication of the shoulder blades with symmetrical semicircles is emphasized by two curving furrows on either side of the spinal column, which is rendered with a broader and deeper groove. Old photographs of the statue taken before it was restored show two vertical ridges running the length of the leg. The details of the knees are less pronounced than in the other statue of Sepa. The line of the clavicles also seems more curved. It is continuous and forms a ridge in the center. There are no nipples. The left forearm forms an acute angle with the upper arm. The left thumb is very flat and more awkwardly carved. The inscriptions, which stand out in relief on the top of the pedestal, give Sepa's titles and name, and they are very similar to those carved on his other statue. 13. Nessa standing. This statue of a woman named Nessa was found covered to the hips with saltpeter, treated in 1966. It remains extremely fragile. Nessa is standing with her feet together, the traditional pose of female statue subjects. Her right arm is at her side, her left arm is bent at a right angle and resting on the stomach. Her sheath dress, with a wide v-neck, reveals a body curiously similar to the figures of Sepa purchased for the Louvre in the same year at Saqqara, Cat. Numbers 11, 12, the head is set deep into the shoulders. The shoulders and chest are very wide, merging imperceptibly into a barely indicated waist and hips. The ankles are thick and the feet short. The identical treatment flattens the figure's natural curves and accentuates the rigidity of the pose. Only the slight swelling of the chest, the nipples that show through the fabric, and the discrete indication of the pubic triangle reveal the subject's femininity, which is attested primarily through the accessories, the long wig and dress and the many rows of bracelets, 11 on the left wrist and 12 on the right. The broad, flat face with high forehead is framed by an opulent tripartite wig. Parted down the center of the crown, the hair falls in three great masses of parallel strided locks, each ending in tiers that give the illusion that the hair is cut in three different layers. The view from above reveals a part ending in a small round depression, which divides the hair into three sections. A wide band of green cosmetic extends under the eyes, which are wide open. The upper part of each eye is bordered by a slight pouch highlighted in black. The eyelid is indicated by a fold, the fine eyebrows molded in relief taper to a point at the templets. The tip of the nose has been restored. There is a broad, well-marked groove between nose and lips, the upper lip of the small mouth, clearly outlined, its median line curving slightly downward, is somewhat fuller than the lower lip. Like Sepa's, the face is expressionless. Although the contours of the body are not pronounced, the clavicle has been carefully individualized with a V-shaped ridge in the middle. The modeling is extremely rudimentary on the flat arms and hands, but the nails are delicately sculpted. The left profile view reveals an elegant silhouette that contrasts with the frontal view in its slenderness, displaying the flat belly and the curves of the thigh. The back is treated with even more restraint. The head seems to sink under the weight of the wig, whose dark and imposing mass contrasts with the body and makes it seem more svelte. The inscriptions, which stand out in relief on top of the pedestal, give the subject's title and name, Royal Acquaintance, Nessa. As with the statues of Seppa, the inscription stands out in relief in a rectangular frame, since the surface of the stone has been carved away around it. The hieroglyphs are rather roughly shaped, with very few details. 14. Ankh seated with hands clasped. Although the place where this statue was found is not known, it can be identified as the high official whose name appears in a tomb at Beit Khalif, not far from Abydos, one where an impression of the seal of King Djoser was also found. The Rijksmuseum van Oudheden in Leiden houses two statues that are probably of the same individual. See Cat. No. R5. The style of this statue is characteristic of the Third Dynasty. Ankh is shown sitting on a backless cubic seat that is decorated on three sides in imitation of the kind of stool with bentwood supports that was in use during the Third Dynasty. Dressed in a plain kilt with the end of a belt emerging from the waist, the figure has a stocky body that conforms to the cubic block of stone from which it was cut. Ankh's shoulders are very high, and his head is larger than life size. The pose with hands clasped on the lap is very rare in Egyptian art. Tilted slightly up, the round face is framed by a tripartite wig of medium length that conceals the ears. The locks that frame the subject's face fall in parallel rows from a central part. The hair does not follow the contours of the back of the head but hangs straight, and the ends are cut at an angle. The eyes are flush with the head. The upper eyelid is emphasized by a slight fold ending at the outside corner, but no emphasis is given to the internal canthus. The eyebrows are thin and arched, and each is indicated by a ridge. The short, broad nose is unusually narrow at the base. The line of the full mouth is very schematic, especially the upper lip, which is not notched. The roundness of the face with its indefinite contours is accentuated by the carefully indicated depression under each eye and the puffiness around the eyelids, the heavy cheeks, the round chin, and the fatty neck. The torso is flat, with very high pectorals that are subtly accentuated. The nipples are executed in relief. No muscle structure is evident in the arms. The very flat hands, the right one placed on the palm of the left, are roughly outlined, and the thumbnail is indicated by a flattened tip. The heavy legs are close together and have thick ankles. The ridge of the tibia is pronounced, and the massive knees have been rendered as geometric shapes, with the patella emphasized by a chevron. Except for the toenails, the feet are free of anatomical details, and these are summarily indicated by depressions. There is no support behind the figure, making it easy to see the back, which is divided by a vertical furrow and lacks indication of the shoulder blades. Certain details were added after the statue was polished, including the rare Shanu necklace, which resembles one found on a relief from King Sinfru's time, to the bracelet adorning the right wrist, and the inscription on the knees, Stalis, priest of Horus, Mediae Ames, Ankh. Like the inscriptions on the statues of Seppa and Nessa, Cat. Nose. RR. 13. These are arranged to be read from the side, from the front to the back of the statue on the right leg, and from back to front on the left. 15. Ankh wearing two feline pelts. Although this statue of Ankh is slightly larger than the one in the Louvre, Cat. Number 14, in several respects the two works are very similar. There is the same flat, round face framed by a tripartite wig of medium length, the same bentwood stool, the same high quality of workmanship, even the same granitic look to the stone. But the treatment of the face is not the same. Whereas the eyebrows of the Louvre statue are more arched and more prominent, in the Leiden statue the philtrum is more pronounced and the modeling is less vigorous. And, although Ankh's pose here with his right hand on his knee and left hand on his chest is more conventional than the very unusual pose of the Louvre statue, the accessories to his costume are unique in the whole of Old Kingdom statuary. Here Ankh wears two feline pelts. The first is pulled over his left shoulder, and one paw hangs over his left knee. The second OND, lying on top of the first, covers his right shoulder, with one paw and the tail hanging on either side of his legs. Together, the two pelts form a V neckline. The semicircular toggle pins depicted on Ankh's shoulders are regularly associated with a feline pelt garment on reliefs. 1 Before the 5th dynasty this costume was apparently related to the royal cult and royal ceremonies, but in the famous Palette of Narmer in the Louvre, the king's sandal bearer is wearing the same type of pelt. The unusual feature here is that the toggle pins placed on the figure's chest like a coat of arms serve as a frame for the carved hieroglyphs that mention his name and titles. To his right they read Ang, and to his left, High Official, Attendant to, the City of, Nekon. And the corpus of 3rd Dynasty statuary. Then, these two statues of Ankh are distinguished by some very original characteristics. Should these features be seen as the mark of a specific function? According to a recently proposed hypothesis, the two statues of Ankh were housed not in a tomb but in a temple, so that they could continue to participate actively in the cult of a god or pharaoh. 16. Princess Regif seated. Sculptures of women from the 3rd Dynasty are rare. Best known are the painted limestone statue of Nessa, Cat. Number 13, and the Lady of Brussels, Muses Wyodar at Dissoir, Brussels, E752. This statue of Regif is distinguished from both of these works by the subject-seated pose 1 and by the medium, a hard, dark stone commonly used during the same period for statues of men, which are much more numerous. The princess is sitting on a block-like seat with decoration on 4 sides that evokes the bentwood chairs of the archaic period. The low back against which she leans is ordinarily reserved for sovereigns. Her feet together, she rests her right forearm on her thigh and holds her left arm, bent at a right angle, against her chest. Her sheath dress with a wide V-neck reveals a stocky body with very broad shoulders and chest, thick waist, hips, and ankles, and short feet. As in the statue of Nessa, the subject's natural curves are flattened and the rigidity of her pose is accentuated. Regif's femininity is conveyed primarily by her costume, the long wig and dress and the bracelets adorning both forearms. Her head is set deep into her shoulders. Her face, broad and flat with a high forehead, is framed by an opulent tripartite wig characteristic of the 3rd Dynasty: 3 parted on the crown. The masses of hair fall outward and down in parallel strided locks that end in tiers, giving the wig a 3-layered look. The upper part of the large eyelids is rimmed. The fine, raised eyebrows narrow to points at the temples. The mouth is large and wide. The precise treatment of the resolute face, highlighted by the polish on the dark stone, gives the piece a severity that makes it resemble more closely the statue of Pharaoh Djoser than that of Lady Nessa. Inscriptions, which stand out in raised relief on the top front of the pedestal, give the title and name of the figure, true daughter of the king, Regif. This is the oldest surviving example of an inscribed statue depicting a woman from the Egyptian royal family. The rank of its owner explains the high quality of the sculpture and, no doubt, the form of the seat as well. 17. Relief of Hesi Re. This panel is one of a group of 6 in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo. 5 were found by Auguste Mariette and transported to the museum in 1866. The 6th was discovered by James E. Kubel in 1912. All are from the mastaba of Hesi Re, a high official of King Djoser, whose titles included Greatest of the King's Scribes, Chief of the Tens of Upper Egypt, and Chief of Dentists. His mastaba, located north of the funerary complex of Djoser at Saqqara, was built primarily of unbaked brick. Hesi Re's offering chapel takes the form of a long corridor and includes, on one side, very unusual paintings depicting funerary furnishings, among them vases, chests, and games, and, on the other, 11 niches. A carved wood panel was fitted into the back of each of these niches. 5 have disappeared, the other 6 depict Hesi Re seated or standing, wearing different hairstyles and costumes but always with the royal scribe's insignia, a palette with 2 compartments for ink, a long pen case, and a small bag, indicating the importance of his position at a time when the corps of scribes was still small. The lower part of the present panel is badly damaged and incomplete. A large crack mars the upper section. Sculpted in low relief, Hesi Re is seen standing with his right arm at his side. In his left hand, held up at chest level, is a staff. The scribe's palette is placed on his right shoulder. He is wearing a short, round wig with straight locks at the crown and rows of curls below. His nose is slightly hooked, and he has a mustache. The rest of the panel's surface is covered with hieroglyphs. The upper section gives Hesi Re's name and titles. Below, in front of him, an offering formula enumerates the food and drink the deceased will need in the afterlife: bread, beer, beef, fowl, and other essentials, accompanied by the sign for 1,000 sand, which is intended to multiply them magically. Because it can be precisely dated, and because the proportions of the figure are elegant and its details and expression realistic, the panel is considered one of the most important reliefs from the Old Kingdom. 18. Relief block with the figure of Aat. This beautiful relief decorated a door recess that provided access to a mortuary chapel. The block is sculpted on two perpendicular faces, and the narrower one simply bears the titles of the deceased. The main face still has traces of red and black paint. The owner of the tomb, A.T., is depicted on foot, walking out of the chapel, a long staff in one hand and a secum scepter in the other. He is wearing a short wig with curls distributed in even rows. His long tunic is of an unusual type. It leaves the left shoulder bare and is decorated with a pleated panel in the front, adorned with a large knot. The figure may appear odd to modern eyes because it combines different perspectives: the profile face with a frontal eye, the frontal shoulders twisting into a profile view of hips and legs, the inner profile of the foot with an arch and a single toe. In short, the image does not reproduce reality but, by using conventions that were established very early, recapitulates the most characteristic aspects of the individual represented. It is these conventions, linked to the purpose of the artwork in question. The image must be effective and recognizable so that it can magically replace the human model that give Egyptian relief. Its inimitable originality. The columns of hieroglyphs above the figure complement the representation and identify the important dignitary. His name is given, and royal governor and chief architect to the king are among the numerous titles he bears. Although the location of Aakhi's tomb is unknown, there are strong reasons to believe it was situated in the necropolis of North Saqqara, since two of its blocks were reused in the modern village of Abu Sir, which is north of the site. An effort has been made to rebuild the archaic period-style cruciform chapel from the fragments dispersed among several museums. To the lower part of a statue of the same individual, also in the archaic period style, is in the Egyptisches Museum und Papyrussammlung, Berlin, 14,277. Aakhi bears the title priest of the Temple of Nebka and thus could not have lived before the reign of this sovereign. His monuments are usually dated to the 3rd dynasty. This relief is one of the finest of the period. With its large masses clearly set off from the background and the vigor with which the silhouette stands out, it contrasts with the stele of Djoser. The particular sharpness of the outlines and the terseness of the style are manifest even in the large, closely spaced hieroglyphs, each made with an incisive stroke. 3 bracelets. Sekhemkhet, King Djoser's successor, undertook the construction at Saqqara of a vast funerary complex similar to that of his predecessor. Excavations conducted inside Sekhemkhet's uncompleted step pyramid at that sire led to the discovery of a very fine group of jewelry. Among the items found in the shaft leading to the funerary chamber were a small, shell-shaped gold box and a bracelet made up of 388 gold beads arranged in 10 rows and held together by 5 bead spacers, as well as many other beads of gold, faience, sometimes covered with gold, and carnelian scattered on the ground. 21 bracelets closed gold leaf hoops, their edges curled slightly inward and most formed into a beautiful, regular shape complete the group. The large number of bracelets found can be explained by the fact that Egyptians of the time liked to wear several bracelets piled up on the forearms. See cat. Number 13. Perhaps originally housed in a chest that had disintegrated by the time of discovery, this jewelry is the only extant group from the 3rd dynasty and must have belonged to a woman from the royal family. It is tempting to compare these pieces to the set from the early 4th dynasty belonging to Queen Hetep-Hirzi, which also includes several bracelets, cat. Numbers 31, 32, and similarly attests to the virtuosity of artisans at the beginning of the Old Kingdom. 3 bracelets. Their small size suggests that these bracelets, reconstructed from fragments found in the ruins of the 3rd dynasty mastaba, probably belonged to a child. Simple, regular hoops, out on the inside and slightly rounded on the outside, they resemble thin ivory or stone bracelets worn in earlier periods. In the Old Kingdom such bracelets were worn, alone or in combination, on one or both arms. Altogether comparable exemplars dating from the 4th dynasty have been found in Mosaggeda, and the rom of a child buried with 3 ivory bracelets on the right arm and 4 on the left. Ivory hoops were common in the Old Kingdom but bracelets were also made of bone, all tortoiseshell, 4 horn, 5 calcite, 6 in metal, for examples of the last, see cat. Numbers 19, 166. 4th dynasty. 21. Colossal head. This larger-than-life-size head is generally dated to the beginning of the Old Kingdom, between the end of the 3rd dynasty and the reign of Khufu near the beginning of the 4th. Unfortunately, because there is no inscription and the provenance is unknown, the subject's identity can be discussed solely on the basis of style. The head is unusually large. Few colossal statues were made in the Old Kingdom, but the earliest of them date from the 3rd dynasty, in Djoser's time, when monumental architecture in stone began to flourish. King Khafre also was a great builder, cat. Number 65, and left monumental sculptures depicting members of his family. This statue is carved in a hard red granite whose surface has never been polished. Traces of a white coating on the crown suggest it was painted. The very broad face evokes the countenance of a tiny ivory statuette inscribed with the name of Khufu in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, J36143. The stern expression and deep lines around the mouth are reminiscent of such austere images of Djoser and his contemporaries as the large Cairo statue, figure 29, reliefs in the step pyramid complex at Saqqara, and panels with Hesi cat. Number 17, in Kaaba Saqqar, see the human image in Old Kingdom non-royal reliefs by Nadine Sherpian in this catalog, pages 104-7. The small, wide-set eyes, treated naturalistically, also bring to mind the images of Djoser and his court, as do the broad nostrils with sharply pronounced contours. The pharaohs wearing the white crown, symbolizing his sovereignty over Upper Egypt. The tabs on either side of the disproportionately large ears belong iconographically to the 2nd dynasty and are identical in type to those depicted on the ivory statuette of Khufu mentioned above. The mantle, which rises high on the neck and conceals the bottom of the crown, is probably the kind worn during the Heb, when the pharaoh ritually renewed his strength. With its muscular neck and impassive face, the head is one in a series of early large royal statues that evoke the absolute power of the king of Egypt in a fairly brutal manner. It anticipates the more subtle and accomplished artworks produced in large numbers during the reigns of Jafer, Khafre, and Menkaure. Although there is still room for uncertainty, this colossal head can be called, with a high degree of probability, a likeness of the builder of the Great Pyramid. 2 relief fragments from Dashur. Ahmed Fakhri discovered many important inscribed blocks during his 1952 excavations at the statue cult temple of the Bent Pyramid of Khufu. Among them were these 2 fragments depicting female figures, found near the eastern wall under the debris of the central hall. The women, who represent royal estates from the names of Egypt, are all similarly depicted. Each wears a wig and a long, tight dress. Each balances on her left hand a hetep-shaped offering table that holds loaves of bread and a hesed. Base middle dot, and each bears the Ankh hieroglyph in her right hand. Carved in low relief and originally painted, the figures still reveal traces of pigment indicating that the skin was yellow and that the dresses had a geometric pattern of red, blue, yellow, and black squares familiar from tomb paintings of the 4th and 5th dynasties. Fakhri determined that the original temple was a simple rectangular structure with a north-south axis. A narrow hall was entered through a doorway on the south side, and friezes decorated the long eastern and western walls. The western friezes showed royal estates from the nomes of Upper Egypt, the eastern ones from those of Lower Egypt. Together they assured that offerings for the king were provided perpetually from all the provinces. Surmounting these representations of the estates was a large-scale depiction of the king in the company of various gods, clearly intended to demonstrate the direct relationship the sovereign enjoyed with the divinities. Scenes from a king's 30-year jubilee. When King Amenemhat I, about 1991 to 1962 BC, first ruler of the 12th dynasty, decided late in life to build a pyramid for himself close to his new capital at Lisht, about 30 miles south of present-day Cairo, he ordered his workmen to collect stones from decaying Old Kingdom pyramid precincts and incorporate them into the inner structure of his own monument. Many of these blocks, which still carry relief decoration made for their original owners, were discovered by archaeologists of the Metropolitan Museum when they excavated Amenemhat's funerary precinct and pyramid at Lisht between 1906 and 1922. The origin of the reused blocks can sometimes be determined from the names of the kings that appear in their inscriptions. However, these 2 blocks form a representation of the 30-year jubilee ritual of a pharaoh, the Heb, or said festival too do not furnish the name of a king, and their attribution to a specific Old Kingdom building must, therefore, be based on the style of the relief. Goedik, who first studied the 2 blocks in detail, believed they were originally carved for Khufu's pyramid temple at Giza, but this cannot be correct, as the reliefs differ markedly from examples dated to Khufu's reign by inscriptions, for instance, Cat. Numbers 38, 41. 3. In terms of both the height and style of relief, the present blocks are comparable only to works from the time of Khufu's father, Khufu. The figures stand out boldly in high relief and are entirely surrounded by straight edges that meet the background at right angles. These characteristics were common to works of the Third Dynasty, Cat. Numbers 17, 18, and continued to appear during Khufu's reign, as demonstrated by the estate reliefs from this king's statue cult. Temple at Dashur, Cat. Number 22. For the reliefs of Khufu's monuments are considerably lower and make use of edges of this kind only around certain parts of the figures, for instance, along the backs of the cattle and cat. Number 38. Especially close to the present scenes in height and roundness of sculptured surface are the reliefs from the tomb of Ra-Hotep, who was a high official of Khufu and would have had his tomb decorated late in that pharaoh's reign or at the very beginning of the reign of Khufu. 5 iconographic details corroborate a close relationship between the Ra-Hotep reliefs and the Heb blocks. In Ra-Hotep's tomb there is, for instance, a representation of a man with a rope over his shoulder whose right arm overlaps his head, and the arm of the standard-bearer in the Jubilee relief is shown in a similar way. 6 Such overlaps are usually avoided in Egyptian art. It is not easy to determine from which building of Khufu's later reign the Jubilee blocks could have derived. The preserved reliefs of Khufu's statue cult temple are somewhat flatter and cruder than the relief on the Lish blocks. However, very fragmentary remains of relief showing a Heb that once adorned the temple at Khufu's latest funerary monument, the northern stone pyramid at Dashur, recently excavated by Stottleman, display a roundness similar to that of the present reliefs. 7 The Lish blocks can, therefore, be tentatively assigned to Khufu's pyramid precinct at the northern stone pyramid at Dashur, although his name does not appear on a reused block from Lisht. We have no knoll edge of any building erected by Khufu during the very first years of his reign. The figures on the Lisht blocks are playing parts in the 30-year Jubilee, that important occasion for the rejuvenation of Egyptian kings through ritual. On the left block the goddess Merit stands in the middle of the remaining 3 registers, left of Kenter on a rectangle bearing the hieroglyphic sign for gold. He is described in the inscription behind her as Merit of the Upper Egyptian lands. Merit's role in the Heb rituals was to invigorate the king, acting as a kind of divine cheerleader. She raises her arm in a gesture that recalls the clapping of hands that was a customary part of Egyptian musical performances. The inscription in front of the goddess provides the words of her chant, recitation spoken, "Come and bring, come and bring." The figure of the king to whom she addresses her words is broken off the left edge of the block. The evidence provided by other representations of the festival tell us that he towered over 2 registers, the one in which mortals and merit are depicted and the one above it, of which little remains. In Re's scene the king performed a ritual race that was a major feature of all Heb's. 9 His movement is mirrored here in the pace of the standard-bearer, who precedes him. The artist has, moreover, positioned this man in rich priestly costume on a ground line higher than that of the other figures to ensure that the top of his standard, with its sacred emblem, is held above the head of the running king. The standard-bearer's ritual title Servant of the Boss, Ancestral Spirits, of Nekhen, an ancient city in Upper Egypt, was written behind him. However, only pair of 1 hieroglyph remains. The proceedings are attended by various court officials. In front of the standard-bearer kneels a man whose title the inscription gives as courtier. The importance of the courtier's presence is underlined by the fact that a representation of the sky spreads over him as well as Merit. To the right of the goddess is a group of 6 men, the first 3 of whom are identified, from left to right, as lector-priest, celebrant, and chamberlain, while the last 3, dressed in especially elaborate costumes, are labeled controllers of the palace. 10. There are scant remains of a register above and a register below the one showing Merit and the courtiers. The lowest register was crowned by a sky emblem decorated with stars, and the remnants of an inscription here refer coming forth from, doubtless part of the depiction of another ritual. The uppermost register was more closely connected with the one in which Mer and the courtiers appear. There is only a simple horizontal band between these 2 registers. The torso and head of the large figure of the running king must have been level with the uppermost register. Of the elements in that register, only part of an inscription is preserved. It states that some spell or other is being spoken 4 times. Still visible to the right are the legs of a man in a portion of a staircase that probably ascended to a throne upon which the king would sit at the conclusion of the ritual. This scene in which a pharaoh is so pointedly encouraged and protected by a divine personage in various court attendants bears witness to both the sacred nature and the vulnerability of Egyptian kingship. When contemplating the monumental pyramids of the Old Kingdom, We should remember that kings needed protection at least as much as confirmation of their power. Paste-filled reliefs from the tomb of Atet. Nefermat, vizier and, according to the inscription on his tomb, eldest son of King Sefru, was buried in a huge mastaba close to Sefru's pyramid at Meidum. 2 Nefermat's wife, Atet, was buried in the same mastaba, where she had her own chapel for her funerary cult. Figure 103. Among the inscriptions in Atet's chapel is one that has always intrigued Egyptologists. 3 Carved in front of a figure of Nefermat who is fairly conspicuously represented in his wife's A tomb. It boasts that he made his pictures in a kind of drawing that cannot be erased. This statement appears to refer to the technique of filling reliefs with paste that was used in the innermost tomb chapels of both Nefermat and Atet. In this technique, figures and hieroglyphs were carved into limestone blocks as recessed areas that the artist filled with colored paste. Undercut edges along the outlines of small figures and signs, as well as rows of deep cells divided by diagonally drilled ridges inside larger ones, helped anchor the paste. Pastes were formed of ochreous clay, gypsum, and other pigments, which were consolidated with a binder of resin, when colors were made of more valuable materials, such as malachite, for grain. These were applied in thin layers over an ochreous clay substratum. Pastes of different colors were packed beside one another, and small amounts of one paste were inlaid into large areas of another to achieve a variety of effects. In the final stage of the process, a fatty substance appears to have been employed to polish the surface of the paste and enhance their colors. 4 Unfortunately, Nefermat's claim that he had invented a method for producing especially long-lasting tomb decoration proved to be incorrect. The paste did not survive well, and the technique was abandoned except for use in a few inscriptions. Cat. Numbers 44, 45 after the one attempt in the tomb of Nefermat and Atet. The paste-filled reliefs were, however, a failure only in the area of technique. Stylistically and iconographically they constitute an important step in the development of Egyptian art. Indeed, they introduced images and motifs that became common in succeeding Old Kingdom representations and in works of later times as well. Moreover, the number of scenes included is impressively large in comparison with the tomb of Mechen, Cat. Number 29, for instance, which was decorated earlier in the reign of Sefru than these reliefs. In fact, the richness of detail in the Atet reliefs has given rise to the suggestion that many more pictorial works existed in the time before the reign of Sefru than are preserved. Most of these may well have been paintings. See Cat. Number 25. 5 The blocks from Copenhagen and Munich clearly reveal the quality and intriguing content of the paste reliefs. One of the Copenhagen reliefs, B, formed the uppermost of 6 registers that decorated the north outer face of Atet's stone-lined chapel, figure 103c. 6 The 2 offering bearers seen marching toward the chapel entrance constitute an image characterized by a remarkable combination of formalism and variety. An inscription in front of the first man states that the scene depicts attacking the line of the washing of the mouth, that is, breakfast, in this context a part of the offering ritual. 7 Another inscription, at the right end of the block, identifies as figs the small round fruits on 2 tables. The first man supports a pair of jars on his right hand while balancing a single vessel on his left. 8 Pairs of wine jars joined together in a single basket were commonly depicted during the Old Kingdom and indeed constituted a hieroglyph. 9 In fact, the unrealistically thin, elongated shape of the jars and the impossible balancing act the offering bearer is performing here suggests that the artist was more concerned with representing the hieroglyphic sign than actual vessels. Only one arm of the second man is shown, on it, in the manner of a fertility figure, Cat. Number 113. He bears a low table covered with figs. The contrasting poses of the 2 bearers not only create variety but also produce a sense that the men are moving away from the table on the floor. Pieces of red and yellow paste remain. Fragments of paintings from the tomb of Atet. Like many other large mastabas, the tomb of Nefermat and his wife, Atet, underwent various building phases. The original massive brick structure of this tomb was enlarged twice by the addition of new layers of brickwork on all 4 sides. 2 Thus in stage 2 of the building process the stone-lined chapels of Nefermat and Atet with their paste-filled reliefs, Cat. Number 24, became the rear portions of cruciform chambers whose new front sections were formed by a brick corridor. 3 The walls of this corridor were covered with plaster and painted, figure 103p. Although the ravages of time left most of these paintings severely damaged, William Stevenson Smith was able to reconstruct one large area from the north wall of Atet's chapel with some certainty. The fragments from the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and the Manchester Museum were once part of this wall. The painting had two main registers and a subregister, figure 104. The scenes painted on a light blue-gray background unfolded in front of a large figure, doubtless a representation of the tomb owner's husband, Nefermat, see entry for cat. Number 24, wearing a shoulder ornament that was part of the priestly leopard garment, for which is preserved on one of the Boston fragments, A. 91.286a. A tat was probably also depicted. 5 in the uppermost register, a man offers two pintail ducks 6 to the large figure. Two joined Boston fragments, A. 91.286a, B. Show the hand of this man and part of one of the ducks. The wings of the duck are black on top and gray with feathers delineated in black below. The gray must have been obtained by mixing white with black. The neck and head are also gray, and the body has a vermiculated effect, typical of the species, that was achieved with black brush strokes over a gray area. 7 to the right of the man with the pintails is a group of 3 running men who pull the rope of a clapnet bird trap that has been set out in a pond in which lotus flowers grow. 8 The third Boston fragment, B, shows part of the torso and the left arm of the man in the middle of this group. According to an inscription that Smith places above the Boston fragment, figure 104, this might have been Nefermat and Atet's son Ankh-Urfend. Part of the right arm of the next figure, possibly their son Lemka, and a bit of the rope are also visible. The rather thick brush lines that outline the limbs and torso are hardly distinguishable from the rest of the painted area, but they help to define such details as the angular elbow and the soft flesh on the inside of the arm of the figure on the right. 9. Below the men catching ducks and perhaps other birds with a clapnet is the sub-register, which contains the famous geese panel now in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo. 10 from the bottom register, where the sewing fragment, C, has preserved the upper part of the sower and the heads of 2 cattle that pull a plow. Plowing, says the inscription above the cattle. Sowing must have been written in front of the sower. In his left hand this man holds the typical whip of old kingdom farmers and herdsmen, which is made from braided strips of leather with a single strip at the end. Here the sower raises the whip as a token of a superiority. There was no room on the wall to show other cattle under his command in front of him. 12 With his raised right hand, held even higher than the left, he throws the seeds onto the earth. The seed bag 13 has 2 elaborate loops at the top that hold a string with which the container is fastened around the sower's neck and shoulder. With rather striking naturalism, the artist allowed the string to disappear behind the sower's upper right arm. 14. According to Smith's reconstruction, a second plow followed the one whose draft cattle are partially preserved on the Manchester fragment. The 2 plows are positioned behind the sower. They do not break the ground but work the earth to cover the seeds the sower throws. 15. Like all the men still visible in the painting, the sower wears a flimsy plant fillet around his head and a black outline band around his neck from which 2 lotus flowers hang. As Smith has observed, the ornaments worn by all the men appear to be made of the same plant shown in the geese seen in and around the pond in which the bird trap is set out. He notes that these ornaments and plants contribute an attractive unity to the picture. 6 The ubiquitous plants with their fresh green also serve to create a festive atmosphere in which the outdoor activities of the men take place. The cattle are differentiated by color. The nearer animal is a dark red-brown, the one behind it a yellowish light brown. 17 Their eyes are round and have large brown pupils and black lashes. These few fragments from a once magnificent large image provide an inkling of the level of quality the art of painting had reached in the early 4th dynasty. 8. It was a level seldom equaled in later Egyptian art. 26. Standing woman. Although individual statues of women from the Old Kingdom are rare, a few, like this alabaster figure in the British Museum, are among the finest works of the period. Once painted, it has traces of black on the wig. The pedestal, feet, and bottom of the dress have disappeared. The subject is standing. In the classic pose of a woman, her feet together, arms falling naturally at her sides, and hands open against her thighs. There is no support behind the woman, and although her back is modeled with care it is very stylized. A long tripartite wig frames the delicate face, and each strand is carefully separated from the others by a groove. The subject's natural hair appears on her forehead below the wig. In its expression the full face is extremely gentle. The large eyes are almond-shaped, and a horizontal incision accentuates the corners. The upper eyelids are indicated by a fine fold, and the eyebrows are barely suggested. The nose is wide and the mouth soft, with full lips that seem to bear the trace of a smile. A profile view reveals the extreme slenderness of the body and the imposing mass of the wig, which seems to weigh down the head. With their unusually supple fingers and nails carefully defined, the hands give an empress sign of extreme refinement. The lines of the dress are not visible on the upper torso, and the body under the imperceptible fabric, which conceals fine anatomical details, is treated with great attention. The careful modeling of the body and the plasticity of the flesh are of a quality rarely attained, although they are matched in the statue of the Lady Hetep Hears, mother of Roar. Cat. Number 131, which is very probably of later date. The treatment of the body of this unknown woman, broad of shoulder and narrow of hip, has also been compared to the group of Hetep Hears II and her daughter Merciank. 1. Certain stylistic features are helpful in dating this work. Rarely after the reign of Menkori does a subject's natural hair appear on her brow under the wig in this way. 2. The tripartite wig, worn in the 3rd dynasty by Princess Regif, Cat. Number 16, and Lady Nessa, Cat. Number 13, is very rarely depicted in statuary after the beginning of the 4th dynasty. 2 other features: the absence of a back support and the positine of the head, set deep into the shoulders as if weighed down by the abundant hair, are reminiscent of the so-called pre-canon Ikal sculptures of the 3rd dynasty. For all these reasons, the sculpture should be dated to the very beginning of the 4th dynasty. But what a distance has been traveled in the treatment of the female body, from the bulky silhouette of Nessa to this harmonious construction, which the translucent stone admirably enhances. 27. Standing man. The formal structure of this figure, defined by the base, the back pillar, and the interplay between the strictly vertical body and the oblique line of the striding left leg, reflects the basic rules that Old Kingdom artists observed in creating statues of men. In its proportions and style, however, the statue differs considerably from other works of the period. The oversized feet, the boldly modified musculature of the legs, arms, and chest, the short neck, and the low forehead have no parallel in contemporary statues found at Saqqara and Giza, for example. Also, unlike works from the Memphite region, is the face, with its large eyes, broad, flat nose, deeply incised furrows between nose and mouth, broad mouth, and prognathal's jaw. The unusually bold style of the statue suggests a provenance in Upper Egypt, and this supposition is confirmed when the work is compared with another, excavated between Luxor and Aswan, at El Khab. 1. Although the head is missing, this second work, today in the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, age 16,160, is so close to the Metropolitan Museum statue in all its essential aspects that it may safely be called a duplicate. The Philadelphia statue was found in a tomb of the early 4th dynasty, and there is little doubt that the Metropolitan statue was created at the same time and in the same place. An independent style influenced by Nubia, Egypt's southern neighbor, existed in Upper Egypt at the beginning of the Mid-Delay Kingdom. This statue appears to provide evidence of a similarly influenced style in the early 4th dynasty. Such examples impressively substantiate the African roots of the ancient Egyptian culture. 28. Mechen seated. This statue was discovered in the serdab tucked behind the north wall of Mechen's mortuary chapel. See entry for Cat. Number 29. Sculpted in red granite, the front of the pedestal is cracked. It depicts the high official sitting on a cubic seat, his right hand closed in a fist and pressed against his chest, his left hand flat on his knee. There is no back support. The head set deep into the shoulders, the slender limbs, the abnormally small proportions of the lower body, and the thin face give the statue an almost sorrowful expression, which is quite unusual in Egyptian art. The face is framed by a round wig that covers the ears, closely hugs the skull, and falls very low and back, concealing the nape of the neck. The rows of curls are indicated by simple concentric grooves. The upper lids of the deep-set eyes are rimmed and extended by cosmetic lines, which, like the eyebrows, are in relief. A marked cleft separates the prominent mouth from the protruding chin. The chest is narrow and the pectorals do not jut out. There are careful indications of the details of the feet and hands. The plain kilt is described simply by the ridge of the belt and an incision for the lower border. The modeling of the back is rudimentary. On the sides and back of the seat, large hieroglyphs in relief, inscribed within a rectangular frame, give Mechen's name and a few of his titles, one of them relating to the cult of the king's mother. Like the chapel reliefs, the statue can be dated to the reign of Snefru. It marks a very important stylistic division between works from the beginning of the Old Kingdom and the austere statuary of the first part of the 4th dynasty. It has certain characteristics of the earlier period: the modest dimensions, the hard stone, the disproportionately large head, and the inscriptions in relief. 2 But the position of the hands, right hand on chest, left on knee, is reversed, perhaps inspired by the change of pose introduced into royal statuary by Djoser. 3 Finally, the seat is different from those preferred in 3rd dynasty statuary, which reflect wood furniture of more ancient times. See Cat. Number 15. The comparison of this statue of Mechen to his likeness in relief illustrates how, at the same historical moment, Egyptian artists could offer very dissimilar interpretations of reality. How different is this compact, almost disproportionate image carved in granite from the elegant silhouette freely inscribed on the chapel walls that dominates the procession of offering bearers. Nevertheless, there are a few points in common between these two representations destined for immortality, such as the slightly raised chin and the wig that covers the nape of the neck. 29. Relief blocks from the mortuary chapel of Mechen. The chapel of Mechen is generally dated to the beginning of the 4th dynasty, during the reign of Snefru. Among Mechen's many titles as governor and head of expeditions, some include the names of the pharaohs Huni and Snefru. Inscriptions at the chapel also mention offerings from the funerary estate of the mother of the king, Snefru, Nimat Hapi. Mechen's chapel, whose many decorated blocks were dismantled and are now housed in the Egyptisch Museum in Berlin, is therefore one of the oldest of the period. It is of modest dimensions, about 265 centimeters, 9 feet, long, 75 centimeters, 29.5 inches, wide, and more than 300 centimeters, feet, high. It was entered through a corridor 215 centimeters, 7 feet, long. The structure is cruciform in plan, as the chapel and corridor are at right angles to each other. The blocks of limestone are entirely covered with sculpted columns of inscriptions and with scenes that would become standard in Old Kingdom mastabas. On the rear wall is a false door, a passageway between the world of the living and that of the dead. Mechen appears there, sculpted in the embrasure, moving to the right. Above, he is depicted sitting in front of a table laden with offerings. There is another image of him seated, a middle-aged man with a flabby chest, receiving invocation offerings. On the other side, priests are performing the glorify Katine rite in the opening of the mouth ceremony, which will allow him to recover the use of his senses in the next world. He is represented 4 times in large scale, leaving the chapel. Processions of servants come to meet him, bringing the products of his many properties as well as furnishings and clothes. Desert animals parade before him. In a stylized hunting scene. In the corridor and above the false door, magnificently sculpted inscriptions record the seemingly endless litany of his titles and immortalize the official documents relating to his estates. These are contracts of sorts, accompanied by excerpts from royal decrees, having to do with the deceased's land holdings. Mechen's estates maintained his funerary cult after his death. In particular, their products supplied the dead man with food and paid the priests employed at his tomb. These texts, among the oldest and most detailed that survive from ancient Egypt, have interested scholars even more than the pictorial decoration. 1 Important for the study of law. They are also of general historical interest, as they retrace the career of the man and precisely describe some of his farms, with their ornamental lakes, orchards of fig trees, and vineyards surrounded by enclosure walls. Are sculpted in high relief and the sharp outlines are drawn with precision. The details are executed with greater care than those in the contemporary mastaba of Ra-Hotep, Egyptian Museum, Cairo, Temp 19 N 24-3. A great deal of attention was given to the modeling of the heads, faces, and hair. The blocks shown here come from the south wall of the corridor and from the east and south walls of the chapel. They were located along the lower third of the monument's elevation. One block, A, was placed at the entryway, see figure IO5, set into the sloping facade of the mastaba. A servant enters carrying a basket full of food on his head. This is one of 3 figures, one above another, representing the endowments of Mechen. 11 columns of hieroglyphs separated by vertical lines, BD, are part of a large inscription that extended from floor to ceiling and which reads from right to left. Reminding the reader that this is property guaranteed by royal decree, it enumerates the 12 endowments of Mechen located in different nomes, provinces, of Lower Egypt. In the 4th column the nome of the goddess Nath, recognizable by her income, detail, B, is mentioned immediately above the nome of the wild bull, detail, A. The 6th column cites offerings from the funerary estate of the mother of the king, /Limat Hapi. In the 10th column, Hieroglyphs depicting a rectangular lake and trees from an orchard evoke one of the deceased's properties. Detail. C. The very large signs, and the spacious arrangement characteristic of the period, are sculpted in careful detail. 30. Model of the Giza Plateau. The exhibition for which this model was prepared traced the history of excavations on the plateau of Giza conducted by George Reisner over a 40-year period at the beginning of the 20th century, and those undertaken more recently by Mark Lehner. The scale model shows the results of these excavations, offering the most accurate picture possible of the plateau and antiquity. The first true pyramid, built in Dashur, south of Saqqara, belonged to Khufu, the immediate predecessor of King Khufu. Thereafter, the tombs of Old Kingdom sovereigns took the form of true pyramids, with one exception, the tomb of Menkauri's successor, Shepseskh, who for unknown reasons had himself buried in an enormous stone mastaba, today called Mastabat Pharaon. Khufu chose the plateau of Giza for his tomb. The Great Pyramid, and its colossal size and perfect proportions have fired imaginations since antiquity. Khufu's son Jafar built his pyramid at the neighboring site of Abu Rawash. See entry for cat. Number 54. But Khafra and Menkauri returned to Giza to construct their gigantic funerary complexes. Together with Khufu's pyramid, their monuments are universally acknowledged to be the most extraordinary architectural achievements of all time. The internal plan of these three pyramids is simple. A corridor beginning at the north face leads to the funerary chamber, where the mummy lay in a sarcophagus placed against the west wall. The straight passageways and ramps required for the workmen and for ventilation were built into the mass of the monument. This was composed of enormous stacks of limestone blocks held together by plaster mortar. Once the funeral ceremony was over, the passages were blocked with huge slabs of granite, designed to prevent access to the burial vault. The exterior was covered with fine, carefully smoothed limestone slabs, giving the monument a sparkling brilliance. Removed for reuse during the Roman period, this revetment has now almost totally disappeared, as has the pyramidion, a block carved in the shape of a pyramid, which crowned the edifice. By happy chance, the summit of the Pyramid of Khufu still has part of its limestone facing, and the base of Menkauri's pyramid is still adorned with 16 rows of red granite, allowing us to imagine the original splendor of these monuments. The measurements themselves convey only a poor idea of the impressiveness of the pyramids. The tallest of these, which bore the name Horizon of Khufu, was originally 146.59 meters, 481 feet, 3 inches, high. The length of the sides is 230 meters, 755 feet, with a slope of 51 degrees 561. The technical achievements of Khufu's architects are extraordinary, and it is difficult to know which to admire most. The transportation on clay ramps and logs of more than 2 million blocks, some weighing more than 2 metric tons, the accuracy of the assemblage, the joints between the facing stones were nearly invisible, less than 1 millimeter in breadth, the extremely level rows of stone, there is a difference of only 2.1 centimeters, half inch, between opposite ends of a single side, the once perfect orientation of the faces in relation to the cardinal points, or the alignment of the southeast corner of the three pyramids along a single diagonal, which reveals that the site was conceived as a whole. The existence of a master plan is also attested by the arrangement of the mastabas of princes and courtiers along streets beside the pyramid. They form a veritable city of the dead around each royal tomb, and a grid reflecting the organization of the royal court. Located northwest of the Valley Temple of Khafra, the Great Sphinx one is part of that king's funerary complex and gives it a unique character. The fabulous animal, a reclining lion with a king's head, is sculpted entirely from the limestone rock of the plateau, whose strata are quite visible in the monument. It may represent the pharaoh as an aspect of the god Horus, whose name was among the royal titles of the 4th dynasty. The monuments of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkauri at Giza display in perfected form the royal funerary complex characteristic of the Old Kingdom, which had begun to take shape during the reigns of Huni and Sefru at Meidum. The layout changed little thereafter. The pyramid was protected by an enclosing wall, where over time depots and stores of liturgical material accumulated. Structures necessary for the cult and afterlife of the king and his family surrounded the pyramid. The north-south axis of the building was marked on the north by the long descending access route leading to the burial chamber and on the south by the presence of a small structure, often a satellite pyramid, the pharaoh's southern tomb. Khufu's southern tomb has recently been found, and there are still questions about its ritual role, just as there are about Djoser's southern tomb at Saqqara. The east-west axis, which reflected the solar cycle, became the more important of the two beginning in the 4th dynasty and underwent a significant architectural development. An upper temple was attached to the east face of the pyramid. It was the principal site of the royal cult, and its most secret chamber contained a room for statues and a sanctuary. It was connected to a covered causeway leading to the Nile, once decorated with reliefs. The causeway ended at a second temple, called the lower temple or valley temple. This building was the starting point for the funerary procession leading up to the pyramid, and the sovereign was worshipped there before his death. Closer than other structures of the complex to the world of the living, this valley temple was equipped with a wharf overlooking a canal, an actual funerary port where boats could dock and unload cargo and passengers bound for the necropolis. Not far away was the city of the pyramid. Here lived the priests and the many employees involved in the day-to-day maintenance of the king's cult. Very often it was still active centuries after his death. At Dashur, south of Saqqara, stelae have been exhumed bearing decrees that exempt its inhabitants from corvées and taxes for all eternity. At Giza, some of the funerary monuments have been excavated. They are among the most magnificent in existence, particularly the Valley Temple of Khafra, with its harmoniously austere spaces adorned with monumental pillars and red granite. The buried causeway, Valley Temple, and Port of Khufu's pyramid are threatened by the encroaching western suburbs of Cairo. However, excavations continue, and recent ones have brought to light the workshops and cemetery of both the foremen and the workers who built the Great Pyramids. Boats made of brick, stone, or wood were buried near the royal tomb to accompany the deceased king on his last journey. 5 have been found at the foot of Khufu's pyramid. The most spectacular of these, made of cedar from Lebanon, were deposited disassembled in enormous pits dug to the south of the pyramid. One of these barks has been rebuilt, and it measures more than 43 meters, 141 feet, in length. More modest pyramids nearby house the tombs of the king's wives and mother. The precinct of Khufu has 3 well-preserved tombs of this sort, and the funerary furnishings of Hetep-Hir's I, his mother, were discovered in a shaft not far from the northernmost of the small pyramids. Cat. Numbers 31 to 33. 33. Reproduction of the carrying chair of Queen Hetep-Hir's. An elegant carrying chair was found at Giza among the decayed remains of other furniture, including a bed, portable canopy, 2 armchairs, and several boxes, within the hidden tomb of Queen Hetep-Hir's I, wife of Sifru and mother of Khufu, figure 107. Its cypress and ebony woods were poorly preserved, but they were restored by members of the Harvard University Museum of Fine Arts expedition. The same team also created the replica shown in this exhibition. 1. Examples of Old Kingdom furniture are rare, and Hetep-Hir's original chair is truly outstanding for its clean lines, simple form, excellent craftsmanship, and lavish use of gold. The elements of the frame were connected by mortise and tenon joints, and the interior of the frame was rabbeted to allow the seat boards to be set in place. The occupant of the chair rode on the seat boards with knees drawn up, a pose that may be represented in later block statues. The carrying poles were further secured by leather thongs lashed to copper cleats both in front of and behind the seat. Gold sheeting impressed with a matte design covered the edges of the chair, while gold palmiform capitals A-shape rarely used in furniture were employed to finish the ends of the carrying poles. 4 identical inscriptions, presented in finely detailed gold hieroglyphs inlaid in ebony panels and probably secured by gesso, give the name and titles of the chair's owner. 3 are vertical and located on the backrest, while the 4th runs horizontally across the chair front. The inscriptions read, Mother of the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, follower of Horus, director of the ruler, the gracious one, whose every utterance is done for her, daughter of the god's body, Hetep-Hir's. 34. Small head, perhaps of Krnc Khufu. Like the colossal granite head of a king who may have been Khufu himself. Cat. Number 21. This small head sculpted in soft limestone is generally dated to the beginning of the Old Kingdom, between the end of the 3rd dynasty and the reign of Khufu. It, too, has no inscription, and its origins remain a mystery. Again we must look to stylistic criteria for clues to its subject. There is a large crack across the crown, and the chin has disappeared. However, the line of the mouth remains visible. The very broad face evokes the visage of a minuscule ivory statue inscribed with the name of Khufu in the Egyptian Museum, Cairo, J36143. Its fragmentary state and mutilation accentuate the geometric organization of the features. The vertical line of the nose, extended by the fracture, and the horizontal lines of eyes and mouth. Remains of a back support are discernible behind the head. The prominent, wide-set eyes are treated naturalistically, as are the eyebrows. Particular attention was given to the zygomatic muscles, which are pronounced, and to the area under each eye, which is recessed. The strong nostrils have a firm outline, as does the prominent mouth, which is deeply inset at each corner. The pharaoh wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, the ear tabs of which are identical to those on the ivory statuette of Khufu and the colossal head. Despite the differences in scale and material, the similarities between this piece and the colossal head are striking. Here, as in the case of the large example, the securely dated minuscule statuette of Khufu offers suggestive points of comparison. It is gratifying that the series of statues that can be linked to the most famous of all Egyptian kings is becoming ever richer and more diversified. 35. Block from the Pyramid of King Khufu. The Great Pyramid, figure 108, built on a superhuman scale, is the tomb of King Khufu. It is the oldest and most imposing pyramid on the plateau of Giza. Between 449 and 430 B.C.E., the Greek traveler and historian Herodotus described the monument, with its causeway and polished stone, with figures carved on it. His informants, Egyptian priests, depicted Khufu as a tyrant who reduced the country to a completely awful condition. Egyptians worked in gangs of 100,000 men for 3 months at a time. They said it took 10 years of hard labor for the people to construct the causeway along which they hauled the blocks of stone. The legend persisted in the popular imagination and was reinforced 3 centuries later by a different version from another ancient historian, Flavius Josephus, who cited the construction of the pyramids as among the labors the Hebrews performed during their captivity in Egypt. All this has no historical foundation, and we now know that the laborers were free peasants, drafted by the king for the great construction projects. Although it has lost its apex, the Great Pyramid, which originally measured 146.59 meters, 481 feet, 3 inches, in height, is still colossal. The number of stone blocks used in its construction has been estimated at 2.3 million, some weigh 2.5 metric tons. During his expedition to Egypt, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was an accomplished mathematician, calculated that the blocks of Khufu's pyramid could be used to build a wall 3 meters, 10 feet, high and 30 centimeters, a foot, thick around France. Although that may be an exaggeration, we do not know the size of the blocks inside the monument. For example, these often cited figures are staggering. 2. The casing, made of blocks of fine limestone from Tura and long since plundered, must also be mentioned. Certain blocks still in place weigh as much as 1.5 metric tons. The enormous granite slabs, which form the ceiling of the king's chamber and cap the 5 weight-relieving chambers above it, are estimated to weigh between 50 and so metric tons each. Based on a reign of about 30 years for Khufu and the scope of the construction undertaken at Giza, Rainer Stademann's calculations show that laborers would have had to set in place 230 cubic meters, 300 cubic yards, of stone per day. That means an average of 1 block set in place every 2 or 3 minutes during a 10-hour workday.